68 years ago, a 12-year-old girl vanished on her way home from church, leaving behind no trace except for her abandoned bicycle, plunging her family into decades of anguish. Authorities suspected a man who lived near the area was involved, but with no body, no witnesses, and far too few leads to pursue, the investigation ultimately stalled. Yet through all those years, cold case investigators never gave up, clinging to the faint hope that one day the truth would come to light. And then one day, from a child assault case in Fort Worth, a crucial detail emerged, one that everyone had overlooked, a detail powerful enough to change the entire case in a way no one could have imagined. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe. Dallas in 1958 looked like a rapidly growing city that still clung to traditional Southern ways of life, especially in the Oak Cliff neighborhood, where rows of low houses, small shops, and Baptist churches formed the familiar rhythm of the community. On the afternoon of June 12th, the atmosphere around Cliff Temple Baptist Church was as routine as any other Thursday. Children's Bible study classes had ended. A few groups of teenagers gathered in the backyard, preparing for the evening activity, and in the wooden hallway, the sound of children's shoes running back and forth mingled with the soft opening and closing of doors. Among the children present that day was Caroline Brooks, 12 years old, living less than a mile from the church, a familiar face. She helped the teacher rearrange chairs and tables, gather books, and roll up unfinished decoration strings from the morning session. Around 4:20 p.m., Caroline left the ground floor activity room, lingered for a few minutes at the church door to retie her shoelaces, then took her light blue bicycle that was propped against the wall. At 4:35 p.m., Caroline left Cliff Temple Baptist Church, riding toward Jefferson Blived, the same route she took home every day, with no other planned stops on her usual schedule. The weather that day was dry and hot, visibility was good, traffic was light, nothing made that short distance seem like an obstacle. At home, the family began preparing dinner. At 5 p.m., Caroline's mother glanced at the clock, still assuming she would appear any moment. But by 5:20 p.m., worry began to set in clearly, because Caroline always came home on time, especially on church school days. Her mother stepped out onto the porch, looking down the quiet street, while her father left the house by car to check Jefferson Blived in both directions. At 5:35 p.m., the family expanded the search. They stopped by the church backyard, walked along the small alleys connecting Jefferson to residential areas, and asked a few nearby shop owners if they had seen Caroline ride by or stop. Every place they went gave the same answer: no one had seen her after she left the church. By 5:50 p.m., the family returned to the western parking lot area of the church, the spot Caroline passed every day, but found no trace, no belongings, or any unusual signs indicating she had stopped there. They continued spreading out for another loop along Jefferson Blived, extending to the gas station at the corner, asking those still lingering along the road, but everyone shook their heads. As time passed with no sign that Caroline would return, unease quickly turned to fear. At 6:05 p.m., realizing all self-search efforts had yielded nothing, and Caroline had been out of contact far longer than her daily habit, the family was forced to make the hardest decision: call the police and officially report Caroline Brooks missing. The call was received at Dallas Police Department at 6:06 p.m. and immediately classified as an urgent missing person report. A patrol unit was dispatched to the Brooks family home just minutes later. 2 officers entered the living room, where Caroline's parents sat waiting in tense silence, and began the initial intake process. They opened their notebooks and requested full personal details of Caroline: age, height, weight, hair color, any easily identifiable features, while also recording a detailed description of the clothing she wore when leaving the church: a light blue cotton dress, white sneakers, and a small cloth bag used to carry her Bible. The family provided additional information about her usual travel habits: a nearly fixed route home, consistent travel time each afternoon, and that Caroline did not have a habit of stopping at stores or neighbors' houses without prior notice. This information was noted to assess how unusual her failure to return on time truly was. After collecting the initial description, police continued asking about the time the family began worrying, the routes they had searched, and the areas they had covered without seeing any sign of Caroline. At 6:25 p.m., another police unit was sent to Cliff Temple Baptist Church to conduct witness interviews. At the church, they spoke with 2 children's teachers and a few teenagers who had lingered that afternoon. Everyone confirmed Caroline left the activity room around 4:30 p.m. and the church grounds at 4:35 p.m., heading in the usual direction toward Jefferson B. No one recalled Caroline re-entering the church after that time, nor did anyone see her talking to or walking with a stranger. Police asked further about foot and vehicle traffic during that time frame. Witnesses said it was fairly quiet, with only a few adults arriving to prepare for evening activities. One teacher noted she did not recall seeing any vehicle parked out of place or anything suspicious around the parking lot around the time Caroline left. Police recorded everything thoroughly, then returned to survey the church exits and connecting routes to Jefferson B, marking intersections with limited visibility that could affect a child's travel. By 6:45 p.m., as the 2 investigative teams compiled the gathered data, they officially established the initial timeline. 4:35 p.m., Caroline left the church. 5:20 p.m., family noted the anomaly. 5:50 p.m., family conducted their own search along the route. 6:05 p.m., police received the report. Establishing the timeline was considered a critical step in assessing risk. The shift commander evaluated 3 possibilities. Caroline had voluntarily changed her route and gotten lost. Caroline had been involved in a vehicle accident while traveling, or Caroline had been approached by a stranger in the short time right after leaving the church. Although no concrete evidence existed yet, the fact that a 12-year-old disappeared on a route less than a mile long, in daylight, under good weather conditions, raised the risk level higher than typical cases of children wandering off. At 6:55 p.m., after completing the risk assessment and establishing the initial timeline, the shift commander decided to launch an official search. Criminal investigation, patrol and auxiliary personnel were mobilized, quickly establishing a search radius of 1 mile from Cliff Temple Baptist Church, encompassing all of Jefferson Blevd, the side alleys leading into residential areas, nearby parking lots, trails along the railroad tracks, and vacant lots interspersed among the old rows of houses in Oak Cliff. The area was directly outlined on the scene map, divided into 6 separate search grids for immediate allocation of forces that evening, marking the moment the case officially shifted from a family missing person report to an organized search operation led by police. At 7:05 p.m., right after teams received their specific positions and assignments, the search force began deployment in the field. Jefferson Blevd was chosen as the main axis for the grid search pattern because it was the route Caroline took from the church and the key corridor during her disappearance window. Patrol teams systematically marked and checked every 100-foot segment along the north sidewalk, while another team moved parallel on the south sidewalk in the opposite direction to ensure nothing was missed between small shops, narrow passages, and sections obscured by trees. Auxiliary teams were assigned to sweep the old wooden house rows behind Jefferson, where many narrow paths and gaps could conceal items or traces of movement. Simultaneously, the criminal investigation team focused on checking intersections between Jefferson Blevd and open alleys, noting road surfaces, lighting positions, and blind spots that could allow someone to approach a victim without drawing attention from passers-by. At 7:32 p.m., a search team member on the south sidewalk reported discovering an object matching the description of Caroline's bicycle. The bike was leaning against a brick wall behind a closed laundromat, about 8 feet from the roadway and out of view from the street corner. The front wheel was slightly turned to the right, with no signs of having been knocked over by impact or strong wind, suggesting it had been placed there rather than abandoned. The search team leader immediately ordered a 30-foot radius around the bike to be cordoned off, limiting contact to avoid disturbing the ground surface and potential evidence. As officers approached closer, they noted the bicycle's position was about 4 feet from the laundromat's back door, tucked against a wall corner forming a blind spot between two buildings. This was a low-traffic spot, shielded from view on Jefferson Blevd, consistent with a pullover or lure scenario where the victim was forced off the bike and quickly moved away from the familiar position. The ground surface near the rear wheel showed a light skid mark, not deep, suggesting a short movement before the bike was propped up. Checking the area close to the wall, police discovered a small item about 1 foot from the base, a hardcover brown notebook matching the description of the notebook Caroline carried to church that day. The notebook was lying askew, spine down against the ground, with a thin layer of dust, but no signs of water damage or deformation, indicating it had fallen not long before discovery. The distance between the bicycle and the notebook suggested a situation where the victim was separated from her belongings involuntarily, possibly snatched, forced to move, or dropped in reflex. Police collected the notebook with gloves, placing it in an evidence bag labeled with time, location, and scene code. Immediately afterward, the area was designated as Crime Scene #1. A temporary barrier was erected around the 30-foot radius, gradually expanded to 50 feet, to account for possible additional traces beyond the core area. A forensic team was dispatched to Jefferson Blevd to photograph, measure, and document the entire scene structure before full darkness. Meanwhile, another team surveyed access points to the two adjacent buildings. The laundromat's back door was locked from inside with no signs of forced entry. However, the alley between the two buildings extended to the rear of the block, where street lighting was dim and foot traffic minimal in the evening. This was considered a potential area the perpetrator could have used to move the victim into a vehicle if the approach occurred close to the time Caroline left the church. The investigation team then expanded the cordon to the north shoulder of Jefferson Blevd, about 40 feet from the bicycle location, to check the possibility a vehicle had temporarily stopped there before approaching Caroline from across the street. All vehicles parked near the scene were fully recorded by license plate, owner, and time of appearance, in case any did not fit the normal traffic pattern for the 4:35 p.m. window. Search teams continued using handheld lights to sweep along sidewalks, checking trash bags, wall crevices, spaces behind wooden crates, and hidden spots close to the roadway. By 8:05 p.m., the entire marked segment of Jefferson Blevd was fully cordoned off. The shift commander decided to preserve the scene overnight to avoid disturbing any remaining traces, officially concluding the initial search phase and transitioning the case to crime scene processing after the first physical evidence. The location of Caroline's bicycle and notebook had been identified. Right after, at 8:20 p.m., the forensic team arrived at Jefferson Blevd and began a detailed survey of the area around the bicycle. Designated as Crime Scene #1, the ground surface near the rear wheel showed a light friction area, not deep enough to prove something heavy had been dragged, but sufficient to note a sudden posture change before the bike was propped up. Near the handlebars, dust on the metal bar had a small arc-shaped clean streak, suggesting a hand or object had contacted it exactly when the bike was stopped. When sweeping angled flashlight beams across the ground, technicians discovered 3 small children's shoe prints leading from the sidewalk into the blind corner where the bike was placed, matching the shoe size provided by Caroline's family. However, right beside those prints, they recorded a series of adult footprints with wide soles and long strides, moving in the opposite direction toward the alley. Although the ground was dry with many compacted dust layers, only a portion of the prints remained clear enough to identify a small checkered sole pattern, not a common shoe type in the area at that time. On the brick wall near the bicycle, technicians found a faint 3-inch-long scuff mark at about the shoulder height of a 12-year-old, suggesting a possible light collision with the wall as the victim was pulled or turned. Caroline's notebook, recovered at the scene, was placed next to the presumed drop position to measure distance and direction. Preliminary analysis indicated the notebook was most likely dropped while the victim was forced to change direction rather than simply slipping from her hand. Within a 200-meter radius of the scene, police began collecting statements from residents and shop owners who had been present that afternoon. The first statement came from an employee at a shoe repair stand 90 meters from the scene, who confirmed seeing a dark green pickup truck driving slowly through that section of Jefferson around 4:45 p.m. He did not recall the license plate because the truck passed quickly, but noted the dark green paint and the rear bed coated with characteristic brown dirt dust, typical of the southern Oak Cliff area. The second witness, the owner of a sewing shop, stated she had seen a small truck parked close to the curb around 4:50 p.m. while she was turning her closed sign. Though she could not clearly see the driver, she remembered the truck parked crookedly in the gap between two shops, a position hidden from the street corner. The third witness, a newspaper delivery man, finishing his shift early, said he had seen a man standing next to a dark-colored pickup, smoking and looking toward the alley between the two buildings. Three other witnesses only recalled seeing a dark green vehicle appear briefly between 4:45 p.m., but could not provide identifying features of the driver. The final two witnesses, an elderly woman and a grocery store owner, did not see the victim, but noted the vehicle left the area quite quickly, with a strong engine sound, as if the driver had accelerated suddenly. When compiling the statements, police noted a clear match. A dark green pickup truck appeared in the area exactly during the window Caroline disappeared. The truck being seen parked in a position overlooking the alley, then vanishing quickly after the time the victim left the church, made the theory of a perpetrator using a mobile vehicle highly compelling. Forensics created a visibility diagram from the bicycle position to the roadway intersection with Jefferson, determining that if there was a perpetrator, he most likely approached from behind the victim, moved her into the blind corner, then quickly redirected toward the alley or to a vehicle parked nearby. The direction of the adult footprints on the ground indicated movement toward the rear of the building row, consistent with witness accounts of a man standing near the pickup. The scene analysis team assessed that the bicycle being neatly propped against the wall suggested controlled behavior, in contrast to cases of accidental falls or crashes. Combined with the dropped notebook and disturbed shoe prints, police leaned toward the likelihood that Caroline was forced to leave her bicycle under pressure from an adult. To clarify the investigative direction, police compiled a list of all dark green pickup trucks registered in Dallas and surrounding Oak Cliff areas in 1958. The initial list included over 40 owners, but when narrowed by reasonable travel radius from Jefferson Blived and the vehicle's appearance timing, the number dropped to about 12. These vehicle owners would become subjects for the next screening phase, while police continued verifying witness statements to clarify the vehicle's features and the exact time it left the area. Through analysis of the scene and initial statements, police had established a foundation for hypothesizing the mechanism of the disappearance. The victim was quickly approached in a concealed area, the perpetrator had a mobile vehicle, and deliberately chose a low-traffic time to act, forming the first major investigative focus of the case. Right the next morning, the investigation team began deploying the vehicle screening step based on the investigative direction from crime scene number 1. From the witness description of the dark green pickup that appeared on Jefferson Blived between approximately 4:45 p.m., the police requested the vehicle registration office to provide the full list of light trucks in dark green registered in Dallas County in 1958. The initial list included 42 vehicles across various models, from Ford F-Series and Chevrolet 3100 to older Dodge models. The police created a classification table by year of manufacture, current registration status, owner residential address, and travel radius relative to Oak Cliff. From the raw list, the investigation team eliminated 11 vehicles that had been reported as damaged or were in repair shops for months, making them inoperable at the time Caroline went missing. Continuing with address cross-checking, 8 more vehicles were excluded because their owners resided too far away, over 20 miles from Jefferson Blived, and there was confirmation they did not appear in Oak Cliff during the afternoon hours of June 12. Cross-referencing work records and actual locations, 7 additional vehicles owned by transport companies had logged routes in vehicle logs and were confirmed by drivers to have been in the eastern Dallas commercial area, making it impossible for them to have appeared near the church. By midday, the investigation team was left with only 16 vehicles requiring further screening. In the second step, police continued eliminating vehicles that did not match the witness description. 5 vehicles fell into the light green group, with colors significantly off from the deep navy-like dark green described by 3 witnesses. Another 3 vehicles had covered beds with tarps or high wooden frames, not matching the description of an open bed with brown dirt clinging to it. When the cross-checking process was complete, only 8 vehicles remained. Police then moved to the step of verifying the presence of these vehicles in the Oak Cliff area on June 12. They contacted the owners and asked about their locations between 4 o'clock, 6 p.m. 4 individuals had clear alibis. 1 was on duty at a gas station with a signed shift log. 1 was working at a carpentry shop with 3 witnesses confirming. Another vehicle was used by the owner's son to deliver goods along a route recorded on delivery slips. And 1 person was at Parkland Hospital, verified by an admission record at 4:50 p.m. Thus, the list was reduced to 4 vehicles. To narrow it further, police used the projected travel routes from Jefferson Boulevard to the owner's residential addresses. 1 vehicle was only about 7 blocks from Jefferson, but the owner worked in Fort Worth and only returned to Dallas on weekends. Upon checking work schedules, the investigation team confirmed the man had been in Fort Worth all day on June 12 and did not return to Dallas. The vehicle was removed from the list. This left 3 vehicles, the 1951 Chevrolet 3100 belonging to Henry Calwell, the 1949 dark green Ford F1 belonging to Thomas Reeves, and the 1950 Dodge B-Series belonging to Earl Whitman. Police sequentially checked the routes, travel schedules, and alibis of the 3 owners. For Henry Calwell, although the vehicle matched in color and type, police verified he was working at a construction site in northern Dallas from 2 o'clock to 6 p.m., supported by timesheets and the contractor's statement. Calwell was temporarily clear. For Thomas Reeves, records showed he left the warehouse at 4:20 p.m., but Reeves claimed he stopped by his sister's house in Wynwood after work. When police verified, his sister said Reeves arrived after 5:30 p.m., leaving a gap from 4:20 to 5:30 p.m. However, Reeves lived about 4 miles from Jefferson and had no known connection to the church area. Reeves' vehicle was also described as having large areas of peeling paint, unlike the pickup seen by witnesses in more stable condition. Reeves was kept under observation, but did not become the primary suspect. From the remaining data, the most prominent name was Earl Whitman. Records showed Whitman's Dodge B-Series was registered at an address less than 1.5 miles from Cliff Temple Baptist Church, right within the area. Police had identified as the likely range for the perpetrator to have observed Jefferson Boulevard. Whitman was a Glenview Theater employee working the afternoon shift, typically finishing around 4:15 to 4:30 p.m. This timing matched precisely with the window when witnesses saw the dark green pickup appear on Jefferson. When police checked the theater's time log, they discovered Whitman left work earlier than usual on June 12, with no recorded reason. Co-workers at the theater did not recall what he did after leaving. No one could confirm Whitman's whereabouts between 4:36 p.m. Geographic data showed the route from the theater to Whitman's home cut directly across Jefferson Boulevard at the exact segment Caroline passed through. Comparing the vehicle description provided by witnesses with Whitman's vehicle also showed a high degree of match: dark green color, open bed with characteristic brown dirt, a small paint chip on the right door edge, a detail that aligned with one witness's vague description near the scene. When combining timing, location, travel route, and vehicle description, police flagged Earl Whitman as the most prominent suspect among the remaining 3 vehicle owners, making him the focus of the next investigative step. Immediately after the suspect list was narrowed to 3 vehicle owners and Earl Whitman emerged as the standout name, The search force continued with a second sweep to expand the victim location search radius, aiming to identify any remaining traces that could support the investigative direction. Although Caroline's bicycle and belongings were found at Jefferson Blid, police assessed that the perpetrator, if there was one, had very likely moved away from the populated area and taken the victim to a more isolated location, consistent with patterns of quick approach and rapid departure from the scene. The first priority area selected was the sparse wooded region in Cedar Hill, about a 20-minute drive from the scene, during the light traffic of 1958. Cedar Hill had numerous small dirt roads and clearings used as unauthorized dump sites, making it highly suitable if the perpetrator wanted to conceal the victim briefly without being noticed by nearby residents. The search team, consisting of police, a group of auxiliary volunteers, and a canine unit, was divided into 3 clusters, each assigned a sub-area based on natural terrain. The tracking dogs were given scent samples from Caroline's clothing to determine wind direction and the potential persistence of residual scent, even though nearly a full day had passed since the disappearance. During the grid search movement, the team only found a few discarded items left by locals, old cloth scraps, rusted cans, and some unidentified tire tracks. None had any clear connection to Caroline. No area in the Cedar Hill woods showed signs of recent disturbance around the time of the victim's disappearance. Leaving Cedar Hill, the search force moved to the Santa Fe Railroad tracks area south of Oak Cliff, where many dirt paths ran parallel to the tracks and were often used by transients or day laborers. This was a convenient area for a brief vehicle stop, with no surveillance, no attendants, and weak nighttime lighting. The sweep team moved in parallel, in 2 directions, Group 1 along the eastward track shoulder, Group 2 in the opposite direction toward the old maintenance station. They used high-powered flashlights to check every gap and every small entrance among thick brush. Tracking dogs were redeployed, but showed no strong reactions, only a few faint scent points that were not clear enough to trace to a source. Near the old maintenance station, police found a pile of relatively fresh ashes with signs of burning within the past few days, but preliminary examination under light revealed only household trash remnants and cardboard fragments, with no traces of children's clothing or personal items. Continuing along the tracks, the team found a lightly swept patch of grass, but it could have been from a handcart or local shortcut traffic. No indicators were strong enough to be considered evidence. The third area swept was the drainage culvert system running beneath Jefferson Bluffed and branching into side alleys. These culverts had fairly large openings, wide enough for a person to crawl into if attempting to hide items or cover traces. Technical teams used industrial lights to illuminate the tunnels, checking mud surfaces, drifting debris, scratch marks, and unusual odors. The entire system within an 800-meter radius of the scene was inspected. Mud at the bottom showed stable sediment layers with no signs of recent disturbance around the time of the disappearance. In one western branch culvert, police found only an old rotted men's jacket, likely washed in from elsewhere. No signs of children's items or fresh fabric tears. After completing the culvert checks, the investigation team shifted to inspecting abandoned houses near Jefferson Bluffed and adjacent streets. In 1958, Oak Cliff had numerous unoccupied wooden houses awaiting repair, many temporarily boarded up or long abandoned. These sites were considered possible places where the perpetrator could have briefly held the victim before leaving. In the first house on 9th Street, police noted the back door was off its hinges, but the thick dust inside indicated no entry for at least several weeks. The second house on Tyler had minor disturbance in the back room, but timing could not be determined. Forensics confirmed it could be old traces from local children playing. The other 2 houses checked were fully sealed with no related signs. When compiling data from all 3 areas, Cedar Hill Woods, Santa Fe tracks, and drainage culverts, the results were consistent. No physical traces or new indicators to help locate Caroline. The lack of findings forced the investigation team to revisit their approach. If crime scene number 1 was the initial forced stop or approach point, the perpetrator had likely removed the victim from the area faster than anticipated. rendering broad-range searches ineffective. In that context, the case shifted focus from wide-area searching to suspect analysis, concentrating on the remaining 3 vehicle owners, especially Earl Whitman, who aligned most closely with the route, timing, and vehicle most consistent with witness and initial scene observations. On the morning of the 3rd day after Caroline's disappearance, the investigation team focused entirely on the most prominent suspect, Earl Whitman, employee at Glenview Theater. Although the second terrain sweep yielded no new physical evidence, Whitman's ownership of a dark green pickup matching the witness description and his travel route, cutting straight through Jefferson Blavd, made him the first target for detailed alibi verification. The investigation team began by gathering information from the theater where Whitman worked. They arrived at Glenview Theater at 8:15 a.m. and requested the time logs and work schedules for Whitman during the week of the disappearance. The log recorded Whitman finishing his shift at 4:15 p.m. on June 12, 20 minutes earlier than his usual end time. On multiple days before and after, times were consistent. Only the day Caroline vanished showed this unusual deviation. This was noted in detail under abnormal time shift for cross-referencing. However, the time log was administrative data self-recorded by employees without supervisory signatures, limiting its reliability to reference only. Police continued by interviewing Whitman's co-workers. The first questioned was Roy Parker, ticket seller. Roy said Whitman was quiet, usually left on time, and rarely finished early since his job mainly involved operating the projector and checking films before evening showings. When asked about June 12, Roy vaguely recalled Whitman leaving the theater quicker than usual, but could not pinpoint the exact time, because a customer arrived to buy single tickets at that moment. Roy did not recall anyone picking him up or any unusual events related to Whitman. The second employee, Joe Harmon, popcorn counter worker, stated he saw Whitman pass the counter area around 4:10 p.m., carrying his jacket over his shoulder as if preparing to leave. Joe did not recall Whitman saying anything or appearing unusual. When asked if Whitman often left early, Joe said it was very rare. The investigation team noted no clear alibi from coworkers. Police then spoke with the theater owner, Mr. Glenn Roward. Mr. Roward confirmed Whitman had requested early leave about twice in the past year, but always with valid reasons. However, on June 12, Whitman made no such request. Mr. Roward also said Whitman was reserved, caused no trouble, and had no unusual absences, though he could get irritable and react strongly to customer complaints about projection quality. When asked if he personally saw Whitman leave, Mr. Roward admitted he did not witness it directly and only heard from Roy Parker. Thus, no one could confirm the precise time Whitman left the theater. After completing witness collection, the team compiled all timing data per the time log. Whitman left at 4:15 p.m. per witness Roy Parker, around 4:20 p.m. Per witness Joe Harmon saw Whitman leaving the counter area around 4:10 p.m. This did not contradict the possibility of Whitman appearing on Jefferson Blavd at 4:50 p.m., matching the witness time frame for the dark green pickup. The drive from Glenview Theater to Jefferson took only about 7-9 minutes in light traffic. The 20-30-minute gap between shift end and the suspect vehicle's appearance was entirely plausible. Police continued analyzing Whitman's activities right after leaving the theater. They went to the suspect's residence, about 1.4 miles from Jefferson, to question his wife, but Whitman lived alone in a small rented room. When working with the landlady, police learned Whitman did not return home between 4:36 p.m. She only saw him return after 6:30 p.m., appearing normal with no unusual dirt or stress signs. However, this statement was only reference value since she did not observe continuously and admitted being busy in the kitchen. Police then interviewed Whitman. They invited him to the Oak Cliff police station for questioning to cross-check the collected data. In the first interview, Whitman stated he left the theater at exactly 4:15 p.m., drove home on his usual route, but stopped at a small grocery to buy cigarettes. When police asked for the store name, Whitman answered vaguely, a shop near Jefferson, but could not recall the exact location. They asked for a more specific description. Whitman only remembered corner near the gas station, while in reality, the nearest Jefferson segment to a gas station had only one such store, whose owner confirmed serving no one resembling Whitman between 4 o'clock, 5 p.m. Upon cross-checking, police realized Whitman's statement did not match geographic data. Whitman continued to state he was not near Jefferson at the time of the disappearance and knew nothing about the pickup seen at the scene. When asked if he used his vehicle that afternoon, Whitman confirmed he drove home but no one witnessed him leaving the theater. Police inspected Whitman's vehicle but found no clear evidence. The bed had brown dirt similar to the witness description, but no items or unusual scratches. This type of dirt was common in Oak Cliff and could not be used as incriminating evidence. When compiling all statements, police noted that the timelines Whitman provided fell within the range, allowing him to be at Jefferson exactly when Caroline disappeared. But there was also no physical evidence proving his presence at the scene. Though minor inconsistencies in his statement and the unexplained early departure were suspicious, these factors were not yet sufficient for an arrest warrant. The investigation team assessed Whitman as remaining the central suspect, but at this point, the lack of direct physical evidence prevented coercive measures, temporarily keeping the case reliant on behavioral analysis and expanded information gathering in subsequent steps. Texas Rangers were brought in to assess the case on the fourth day since Caroline's disappearance, particularly after the local investigation team noted the initial behavioral pattern suggested a calculated quick approach type. In the first joint meeting, Rangers specializing in behavioral analysis presented the grab-and-go model, a form of abduction occurring in an extremely short window, often under 1 minute, at a location the perpetrator had pre-observed and identified as having suitable blind spots. In this model, the perpetrator typically selects a young victim in a low-traffic area during the late afternoon light transition and especially at intersections between residential and commercial zones where the victim has a repeated route habit. When cross-referenced with Jefferson Bleb facts, the Rangers analyzed that the bicycle being propped neatly against the wall, the notebook fallen a few feet away, and adult shoe prints leading to the alley indicated a fast, controlled action with minimal disturbance. The perpetrator had almost certainly used the blind spot between two buildings to approach Caroline without creating noise or allowing timely reaction. The Texas Rangers identified 3 core elements in building the profile. The perpetrator must have a mobile vehicle. The perpetrator must be familiar with the Oak Cliff area or have regular reason to pass through Jefferson. And the perpetrator must have quick situational assessment ability to choose the moment of action without direct witnesses seeing the approach process. From this, they cross-checked the profile against the remaining 3 suspects. The other 2 vehicle owners, Caldwell and Reeves, had no strong geographic ties to the Jefferson area at the time of the disappearance. Their work schedules did not overlap with the time Caroline left the church, and they lacked daily routines passing through the area. In contrast, Whitman matched many elements of the model. First, his post-shift route ran straight through Jefferson Bleb. Second, Whitman's departure time from the theater, around 4:20 p.m., matched almost perfectly with the witness sighting of the dark green pickup. Third, the nature of Whitman's job at the theater required stable evening presence only, while the period from shift end to the first showing was flexible, creating an unsupervised gap. The Rangers also noted that living alone meant Whitman was not constrained by people who could provide alibis, making empty time periods harder to verify. Additionally, the Rangers requested analysis of potential motive. Although no clear prior assaultive behavior was recorded for Whitman, the investigation team noted the theater owner's account of his occasional irritability and strong reactions to customers. The Rangers commented that a quietly explosive temperament, combined with an independent lifestyle, could fit an opportunistic offender, someone who does not plan specifically in advance, but exploits a situation when a suitable victim appears under favorable conditions. When analyzing behavior at crime scene number 1, the Rangers paid special attention to the fact that Caroline's bicycle was propped up neatly rather than abandoned or knocked over. In the quick abduction model, the perpetrator only pauses long enough to pull the victim from the vehicle and gain control. But propping the bike suggested the perpetrator wanted to avoid creating an immediately attention-grabbing unusual scene. This indicated calculation, lack of complete panic, and high composure during the crime, consistent with someone familiar with the area and aiming to minimize detection risk. The Rangers also assessed the possibility the perpetrator had scouted the victim beforehand. Although no evidence placed Whitman at the church, they noted that both Glenview Theater and Whitman's rooming house lay between major roads connecting to Jefferson, making it entirely plausible he incidentally encountered Caroline on his way home. In such a case, the perpetrator would belong to the opportunistic offender group, someone whose intent arises upon seeing a victim fitting the criteria, young, traveling alone, and entering a low-traffic zone. To reinforce the assessment, the Rangers requested a simulation reenactment of the route from the theater to crime scene number 1. When test-driven in a vehicle similar to Whitman's, the average time from Glenview Theater to the spot where Caroline's bicycle was found was only 7 minutes, aligning with the 4:40–4:45 p.m. witness window. Additionally, when the test vehicle stopped at the position where the pickup was seen, the driver's seat offered a highly favorable view angle into the alley if the driver wished to observe a passing victim. This was rated by the Rangers as a high-reliability behavioral fit. However, the Rangers emphasized that behavioral compatibility alone was insufficient to conclude Whitman was the perpetrator. The local investigation team had to continue opening other avenues to rule out all possibilities. They requested further review of all dark green pickup owners within a 5-mile radius of Jefferson, including vehicles registered to relatives or unregistered, expired for the past 6 months. At the same time, they suggested examining individuals with records of disturbance, deviant behavior, or files related to minors in the Oak Cliff area during the 1950s. But even as these avenues expanded, the Rangers still marked Whitman as the subject with the strongest fit to the crime model, based on mobility, available time, matching route, suitable vehicle, and scene behavior. The combined behavioral analysis from Dallas Police and Texas Rangers showed a significant overlap between the grab-and-go perpetrator profile and Whitman. However, absent any direct incriminating physical evidence, the investigative direction still needed to focus on Whitman while maintaining parallel verification lines to ensure no potential suspects outside the initial model were overlooked. Throughout 1959, the investigative team maintained a level of monitoring on the Caroline Brooks disappearance case, but every lead that was pursued quickly reached a dead end. After completing the behavioral analysis and reviewing the grab-and-go crime pattern, police continued deeper investigation into the 3 remaining dark green pickup truck owners, but the results yielded no progress. With Henry Calwell, although not a primary suspect, the investigative team still rechecked his work schedule, vehicle condition, and whereabouts over multiple days following the incident. All data matched his original alibi. With Thomas Reeves, the unexplained time gap from 4:25:30 p.m. remained, but there was no evidence or witness statement connecting him to Jefferson Bluffed at the time Caroline went missing. Reeves's vehicle, after being examined by forensic technicians, showed no signs of having been used to transport a person or heavy objects on the day of the crime. All points of suspicion remained at the level of speculation, with no legal basis to pursue more aggressive verification. The main investigative focus continued to center on Earl Whitman. However, despite the team's efforts to dig deeper into his records, they could not uncover any new elements. Subsequent interviews with Whitman produced similar results. His statements remained consistent, with no changes to the timeline and no clear contradictions strong enough to serve as grounds for incriminating comparison. Whitman's vehicle, a dark green Dodge B-Series pickup, was inspected multiple times, but showed no new scratches, trace evidence, or foreign objects related to the victim. Because the truck bed frequently contained repair tools that Whitman carried from the theater to his home, finding clear trace evidence was nearly impossible under the scientific and technical conditions of 1958-1959. Investigators also attempted to track down any new witnesses who had passed through Jefferson Bluffd on the afternoon of June 12, but those located provided only vague statements or had no clear recollection of the time. No one reported seeing any direct behavior involving a man or a pickup truck near Caroline. Additionally, surveillance camera infrastructure did not yet exist, and the Oak Cliff area at that time had no traffic recording systems, making it impossible to reconstruct vehicle movements. In 1960-1961, police conducted 2 additional sweeps of individuals with criminal histories in the area, including offenses involving disorderly conduct, assault, or matters related to minors. None of the individuals on the list had any connection to Jefferson Bluffd or Cliff Temple Baptist Church on the day of the disappearance. Even those with notable records, when cross-checked geographically, were outside the range from which they could have accessed Caroline at the time. By mid-1962, a development further complicated the case. Police received information that Whitman had left Texas and moved to Oklahoma to work at another theater. This relocation was not illegal and did not meet conditions for restraint, but it made monitoring him more difficult due to reliance on limited federal and interstate coordination at the time. Although the Dallas investigative team sent periodic update requests, the information received was purely administrative. Whitman changed residences, updated rental addresses, had no law violations, and no reports of disturbance at his new workplace. No new elements emerged to justify a search warrant or additional interviews. From 1963 to 1966, the Caroline Brooks case was placed on a periodic review list, reopened once each year to check files for any new data. All reopenings produced the same outcome: no new witnesses, no new physical evidence, no second crime scene traces, and no reports of similar missing persons cases or grab-and-go incidents in the area. The team could not prove Caroline was still in the Jefferson area after 4:35 p.m., nor could they prove Whitman appeared at the alley where the bicycle was found. The possibility that the perpetrator removed the victim from Dallas very quickly in a short time window was considered, but there was no supporting evidence. By the late 1960s, the case file became even more difficult to handle as many witness records faded. Some local business owners moved or closed, making re-verification of original statements increasingly impossible. New investigative teams assigned every few years to review the case file consistently concluded there was insufficient data to proceed further. In 1973, the Dallas Police Department implemented a case classification process by activity level to optimize resources. With nearly 15 years of no progress, the Caroline Brooks case was classified in the group not feasible for expanded investigation without new physical evidence. In early 1974, the main file was officially transferred to the cold case category. This was not a decision to close the case, but an acknowledgement that all avenues had been exhausted to the limits of the technology and personnel available at the time. With a lack of physical evidence, no new witnesses, and the primary suspect having left Texas, the Caroline Brooks case entered a prolonged frozen stage, leaving an unfillable gap in the investigative process for many years afterward. In August 1974, nearly 2 decades after the Caroline Brooks case was moved to the cold case category, an unexpected event occurred in the sparse wooded area of Cedar Hill, an area that had been searched by search teams in the early days after Caroline's disappearance, but yielded no traces. While a county work crew was excavating to expand a dirt road for a drainage system improvement project, one of the diggers noticed the shovel blade striking an unusually hard object buried about more than a foot deep. Initially, they thought it was a rotted log or old tree root, but as they brushed away the soil by hand, the curved, fragile shape of a small bone gradually emerged, prompting the crew chief to immediately halt work and call the Dallas Police Department. Patrol units and crime scene technicians arrived within 20 minutes, cordoning off a 50-foot radius around the excavation site. From ground level, the area was near the edge of a sparse wooded patch, not far from a dirt road once used as a shortcut by small trucks. The scene was designated as Suspected Point, Cedar Hill, pending verification of any connection to cold case files in the county. As the technical team began manual excavation around the bone fragment, the full skeletal structure gradually emerged: leg bones, pelvis, small rib sections, and finally, the child's skull. The skeleton was in a contracted position, with joints loosened due to natural decomposition over time, and no signs of sharp force cuts or breaks. However, the soil layers around the skeleton showed uneven compaction, indicating the site had been disturbed, not the original burial location. Near the femur, technicians discovered a small fragment of light blue fabric, faded but still retaining the distinctive cotton weave of children's clothing from the 1950s. The fabric fragment was collected per standard procedure, placed in a separate evidence bag, and labeled with time and location. Several soil samples mixed with fibers were also collected for later analysis. About 30 centimeters away, the team found a thin, deteriorated synthetic cord fragment, approximately 12 inches long, rotted but still holding a twisted shape, leading police to note it could have been an item used before burial, though its exact function could not yet be determined. After preliminary excavation of the burial site, the field forensic team confirmed the skeleton belonged to a child, estimated age approximately 11-13, based on long bone size and epiphyseal closure rates. The initial conclusion immediately reminded police of several cold case files, including that of Caroline Brooks, the 12-year-old victim who vanished in 1958. Although no direct link could be made at the scene, the investigative team promptly placed the skeleton in the priority evidence category for analysis at the Dallas County Forensic Lab. By late morning that same day, the team completed collection and packaging of each skeletal portion according to ancient skeleton recovery standards, ensuring no alteration of spatial relationships between bones. Each bone section was individually wrapped in preservation paper and placed in numbered boxes. The fabric fragment, soil samples, surrounding roots, and deteriorated cord were all fully collected. The site was comprehensively photographed from overhead and at each excavation position for later reconstruction of the burial layout. When the skeleton arrived at the Dallas Forensic Lab, experts began cleaning each portion with soft brushes and specialized solutions. During cleaning, they noticed differences between the soil adhering to the long bones and that covering the ribs, variations in color, fineness, and mineral composition. This indicated the body had once lain in a different location before being brought to Cedar Hill, reinforcing the assessment that this was a secondary burial site rather than the place of death or initial burial. Forensic experts also noted uneven surface decomposition on the bones, consistent with the body having been exhumed and moved during the mid-decomposition stage, not buried intact from the start. This analysis aligned with the mixed compaction structure of the soil at the scene. Upon closer inspection, the forensic team observed minor chipping on some small bones, but these were post-decomposition damages, likely from digging tools or soil pressure. There were no signs of perimortem bone trauma from impact. By the end of the day, after compiling all data into a preliminary report, the forensic lab informed Dallas police that the estimated age of the skeleton closely matched Caroline Brooks's age at the time of her disappearance. The light blue fabric fragment, though not yet proven to be the victim's, matched the description of the clothing Caroline was wearing. On the last day she was seen, with the clear conclusion that the Cedar Hill area was a secondary burial site, the investigative team recognized that this bone discovery could be the first physical evidence in 16 years potentially linked to a long-standing cold case, one that could potentially alter the entire direction of the file frozen since 1974. At the Dallas Forensic Lab, analysis of the skeletal remains found at Cedar Hill was given absolute priority due to the potential connection to one of the county's longest-standing missing persons files. The process began with establishing basic biological parameters age, estimated height, and biological sex. Based on long bone epiphyseal development and growth plate closure, forensic experts determined the skeleton belonged to a child aged approximately 11-13, precisely matching Caroline Brooks's age when she disappeared in 1958. Estimated height, derived from the femur and tibia, ranged from 145 to 150 centimeters, consistent with family-provided data in the original file. Pelvic bone morphology showed female characteristics, further supporting the hypothesis that the skeleton could belong to a girl. After establishing basic biological identification, the forensic team moved to dental analysis, the most critical factor in long-decomposed remains cases. Fortunately, a 12-year-old child's dentition typically includes several permanent teeth, allowing comparison with prior dental records. Investigators promptly obtained Caroline's dental records from the clinic that treated her in early 1958. The records included tooth position charts, canine characteristics, prior orthodontic notes, and a lightly filled tooth hash 14. When compared to the Cedar Hill skeleton, forensic experts found exact matches in tooth positions, including the unique feature of a small filling on the posterior surface of tooth hash 14. The victim's 3 lower incisors also showed mild wear consistent with the dentist's notes on nighttime bruxism. This match achieved near absolute certainty, sufficient to confirm the skeleton was that of Caroline Brooks. Once identity was confirmed, the forensic team proceeded to analyze cause of death and pre-burial context. Since the skeleton had fully passed soft tissue decomposition, finding direct signs of external force was difficult. However, examination of the wrist and ankle bones revealed shallow, unusually curved indentations, indicating the bones had been subjected to pressure from a soft, cord or fabric-like material before death. These grooves were not deep enough to fracture bone, but matched patterns consistent with temporary binding or restraint. This suggested the victim may have been restricted in movement prior to handling of the body. Forensic experts noted that these marks occurred before bone decomposition, meaning during or near the time of death, not from post-burial soil pressure. On other long bones, humerus, femur, no fractures or heavy impact marks were found. There were no signs of weapon-related trauma. This made an exact cause of death impossible to determine definitively, but it indicated the victim did not die from direct violent force applied to bone. Next, the forensic team analyzed soil adhering to the skeleton. Spectrophotometry and microscopic examination revealed 2 distinct and different soil types. The first, dark muddy soil with high organic content, decayed roots, and fine clay, matched characteristics of the Cedar Hill discovery site. The second, dry yellowish-brown soil with larger grains and low organic matter, matched samples from the Jefferson-Bleved area and eastern Oak Cliff, characterized by aged compacted soil and mineral dust from construction processes. This proved the body was not initially buried at Cedar Hill, but had lain in a location with different soil conditions before being moved to the discovery site. Analyzing the adhesion pattern of the 2 soil layers, experts noted the yellowish-brown soil penetrated deeply into bone joint crevices and articulations, indicating it was the first soil the body contacted. The Cedar Hill soil only adhered superficially in a loose structure, showing burial at Cedar Hill occurred after significant natural decomposition had begun. In other words, the body was first buried elsewhere shortly after death, then exhumed and moved to Cedar Hill when soft tissue had substantially decomposed. Further assessing body transport, forensic experts pointed out that the secondary soil, yellowish-brown, contained additional mineral dust and ultrafine metal particles. Compositional analysis revealed traces of oxidized iron dust, commonly found in old truck beds, especially those unpainted or with degraded protective coatings. From this, they logically concluded the body had been transported in a vehicle with a metal cargo bed, most likely a pickup truck common in the late 1950s. This aligned with the original investigation. A witness saw a dark green pickup at Site 1, and perpetrator movement patterns were assessed as consistent with a mobile offender. The forensic team added to the report that the body was likely removed shortly after death, placed in the truck bed, transported through an area with yellowish-brown soil, temporarily buried at an initial location, then later exhumed and brought to Cedar Hill, possibly to conceal evidence when the original area became risky or too easily discoverable. The forensic report concluded: 1. The skeletal remains are those of Caroline Brooks. 2. The victim showed signs of binding prior to death. 3. The body was buried in at least 2 locations. 4. Body transport involved a vehicle with a cargo bed. And 5. Cedar Hill was only a secondary burial site, not the crime scene. These conclusions were immediately forwarded to the Dallas Police Department and marked the most significant turning point since 1958, when for the first time, the mechanism of Caroline's disappearance could be reconstructed based on clear physical evidence. After the forensic report confirmed that the skeletal remains at Cedar Hill belonged to Caroline Brooks and that the body had been buried in at least 2 different locations before being moved using a vehicle with a cargo bed, the Dallas Police Department immediately reopened the suspect review process based on this new data. The focus of this review shifted away from verifying presence at the time of the disappearance and instead turned to assessing each suspect's access to a suitable vehicle, opportunity, and sufficient geographic knowledge to transport the body across multiple points before burial at Cedar Hill. The 1958 suspect list was retrieved from the original files, including more than 24 names considered in the early stages, both those once viewed as potential suspects and individuals merely screened due to their residence near Jefferson Blevd. With the new forensic data indicating the body was moved by a small truck, the investigative team immediately eliminated all individuals who did not own a vehicle at the time of Caroline's disappearance or lacked access to a truck through family members. 16 of the original 24 suspects were removed from the list in a single morning for this reason alone. The investigative team continued eliminating individuals who lacked the ability to move the body to 2 separate locations within the time frame following the crime. This was based on each person's residential history, occupation, and workplace locations in 1958. Those who worked factory jobs with strict shift schedules or lived with large families were ruled out because it was nearly impossible for them to leave home or access a vehicle with a cargo bed for the extended period required to bury the body at 2 different sites. After this second round of eliminations, the list was narrowed to 5 individuals who had been initial persons of interest, including 3 pickup truck owners previously considered in 1958. Henry Caldwell, Thomas Reeves, and Earl Whitman, along with 2 other men who had been interviewed because they lived near the church but did not own trucks. With the new forensic requirement that the body had to be transported in a metal bed vehicle in an open or empty condition, the 2 men without vehicles were immediately eliminated, bringing the list back to the 3 original suspects. At this point, the case was transferred to the Dallas Cold Case Investigative Unit, working in coordination with experts from the Texas Rangers. They used 1958 topographic maps combined with construction records to reconstruct the most plausible route the perpetrator could have used to move the body from Jefferson Blvd to the first burial site, and then from there to Cedar Hill. This route had to meet 3 conditions: 1. Minimal busy intersections with heavy traffic, 2. Opportunities to stop the vehicle without drawing attention, and 3. Connectivity from Oak Cliff to the wooded Cedar Hill area via dirt roads that existed in the 1950s. When applying this model, the team identified 2 plausible travel routes, the first running along Tyler Street down to vacant land south of the city. The second heading southwest along Duncanville Road, accessing Cedar Hill through forested branches. Cross-referencing the maps with each suspect's 1958 residential addresses and schedules, Henry Caldwell, a house painter with a fixed work schedule in North Dallas, had no reason or feasible opportunity to travel either of these routes. Investigators also rechecked residence records showing Caldwell lived in a crowded boarding house, making it highly unlikely he could leave in his 1951 3100 pickup for several hours in the late afternoon, evening without neighbors noticing. Moreover, Caldwell had no history of using roads leading into Cedar Hill, ruling him out from the profile of a perpetrator with local geographic knowledge. After eliminating Caldwell, the list was reduced to Reeves and Whitman. For Thomas Reeves, although he had previously been considered due to a gap in his timeline on the day of the disappearance, the cold case team reanalyzed his 1958 residence and employment data. Reeves worked at the Elmwood warehouse, located east of Oak Cliff in the opposite direction from both routes to Cedar Hill. For Reeves to loop south and west to reach the wooded area would have been highly illogical if the goal was to conceal the body. The route was longer, involved more intersections, and did not fit the risk-averse behavior typical of such offenders. Police also pulled land tax records and rental documents for Reeves from 1958, 1960, showing no activity or travel through Cedar Hill for any residential or work-related purpose. Although physical evidence could not completely rule out Reeves, his lack of geographic familiarity and absence of a logical route for body transport made him no longer a fit for the updated profile. This left Earl Whitman as the only remaining name that matched every piece of newly introduced forensic evidence. Upon re-examining residence history, investigators discovered that Whitman had worked temporarily at a tractor repair shop on the far west edge of Oak Cliff in 1957, less than a mile from one of the two routes leading to Cedar Hill. This indicated Whitman had knowledge of the area's terrain and access to low-traffic dirt roads that locals rarely noticed. The agency also found that in the 2 years following Caroline's disappearance, Whitman exhibited changing living patterns, moving frequently within the South Oak Cliff area, a behavior consistent with individuals attempting to avoid attention after involvement in a crime. When aligning all behavioral, forensic, geographic, and circumstantial data, Whitman emerged as the sole suspect who fully matched possession of a suitable vehicle for body transport, a feasible route to Cedar Hill, a schedule allowing him to disappear from Jefferson Blevd during the critical time window, sufficient local knowledge to move the body through 2 burial sites, and crucially a residence timeline aligning with the period of body relocation before Cedar Hill became the final burial location. After nearly 2 decades of deadlock, the Caroline Brooks case had finally narrowed its suspect list to one individual who realistically met every condition introduced by the new forensic data. Earl Whitman. In 1998, when the Caroline Brooks file had lain dormant for nearly a quarter century, an incident in Fort Worth unexpectedly brought the entire case back into the light. An 11-year-old girl living in the Riverside Avenue area was approached by an unknown man while walking home from school around 4 p.m. The perpetrator was driving an old dark green pickup with a long bed and the rear window taped over with opaque duct tape, a highly unusual detail that matched the description given by a witness who had seen a similar vehicle near Jefferson Blevd in 1958. The attacker attempted to subdue the child by pulling her into the truck, but she fought fiercely, slipped from his grasp, and ran into the yard of a nearby residence. The homeowner immediately called 911, ensuring the victim's safety. When Fort Worth police interviewed the still traumatized girl, she provided a very specific description. The man was thin, about 5'10" tall, with graying hair but a movement style that did not match that of an elderly person. His eyes were cold and inhuman, according to her words. Most importantly, she described the pickup, dark green paint, with mottling, a long dent on the left side of the bed, as if pushed outward from inside, an old Chevrolet logo nearly peeled off, and the license plate with one corner broken. These details were recorded verbatim in the Fort Worth PD report. When officers ran the vehicle description through the Tarrant County registration system, they found no exact match, only a few similar cases that were not close enough. However, the supervising sergeant recognized the description as identical to a very famous but never solved missing persons case from Dallas. He immediately forwarded the entire report to the Dallas Police Department with the note, "This vehicle may be the same type as the Oak Cliff 1958 case." The report went straight to the Cold Case Records Management Unit, where investigator Maria Henderson, newly assigned to oversee unsolved disappearances prior to 1970, took receipt. Henderson, known within the department for her exceptional memory for details and ability to cross-reference cases separated by decades, immediately recognized the similarity. She requested the original Caroline Brooks file, including reports of witnesses who had seen a dark green pickup near the location where the victim's bicycle was found in 1958. There she uncovered a nearly forgotten detail after 40 years. A 10-year-old boy at the time had stated he saw a green truck with a long bed, stopped at the edge of Jefferson Road, with damage to the rear door and tape covering it. In 1958, the statement had been deemed unreliable due to the young age of the witness. But in 1998, the Fort Worth girl's description matched it almost perfectly. Henderson returned to the old suspect list and noted that only one person on the entire list had ever owned a pickup with that exact long bed configuration, Earl Whitman. In the 1958 file, Whitman owned a 1950 dark green Chevrolet 3100 with a rear window that had been temporarily repaired with duct tape after the glass frame broke. This detail suddenly stood out sharply. With the Fort Worth report in hand, Henderson compiled a behavioral comparison profile, quick victim approach, grab-and-go tactic, similar to the suspected method, and the same vehicle type appearing in the Caroline case. She contacted Fort Worth PD directly to confirm the description, obtained the victim's composite sketch of the perpetrator, and requested any tire track evidence collected at the scene. When a Fort Worth investigator mentioned that the truck looked like it had been around for at least 40 years, Henderson knew this might be the first genuinely significant new lead the Caroline Brooks investigation had received in decades. All the pieces began showing a clear connection between the 1998 assault and the 1958 disappearance, leading Henderson to believe the man in the dark green pickup could be the same person who had abducted Caroline 40 years earlier. This made her first cold case assignment the immediate top priority for the entire Dallas Police Department. Right after determining that the 1998 Fort Worth attack shared many similarities with the Caroline case from 1958, investigator Maria Henderson requested the full opening of the archived crime scene photographs and the original Jefferson Blevede maps from the 1950s to conduct a digital reconstruction. The faded photographs taken by Dallas police that year, including the bicycle's position, the roadside area, and angles shot from nearby residences looking out onto the street, were transferred to the image analysis lab for high-resolution scanning, color restoration, and lens distortion correction to accurately recreate the spatial layout. The 1958 Jefferson Boulevard maps, including urban planning records, old streetcar route guides, sketches of unopened road segments, and aerial photographs from the planning department, were digitized and overlaid onto modern maps to identify the locations of roads, turns, and vacant lots that had changed significantly after more than 40 years. Once all data was digitized, Henderson's team reconstructed the possible routes Caroline could have taken from Cliff Temple Baptist Church to home, based on documented travel habits from the original records and family statements. The simulation showed Caroline had only 3 feasible routes, 2 of which passed along Jefferson Blevede, a wide road with few obstructing houses, convenient for a pickup truck to stop briefly without drawing excessive attention in the late afternoon. Each route was simulated at the average speed of a 12-year-old girl riding a bicycle, calculating travel time from 4:35 p.m. to around 4:50 p.m., the window when Caroline was most likely to have passed the later discovered bicycle location. From there, the team modeled the perpetrator's movement using a grab-and-go pattern. The pickup had to stop at the exact moment Caroline rode by. The stopping position had to be sufficiently concealed to avoid visibility from nearby stores, and the approach angle had to allow the door to open and close quickly within seconds. Using data from the original crime scene photos, the reconstruction noted that the bicycle recovery location featured a wider roadside depression than surrounding sections, a remnant of a temporary loading zone for delivery vehicles from that era. In the 3D model, the team found this depression created a blind spot from the perspective of nearby residences, especially during the period of strong westerly sunlight, making it difficult for people inside homes to clearly observe street activity. Based on distances, simulated camera heights, and shadow analysis, Henderson determined this depression was perfectly suited for a long-bed 1950s pickup to stop without attracting notice. The reconstruction model showed Caroline's bicycle left in a trajectory where the front wheel would veer slightly left if the rider were suddenly pulled off the bike. When comparing the bicycle's tilt angle in the crime scene photo with the physical simulation, the analysis team concluded the bike was abandoned abruptly. Consistent with a quick abduction pattern, the perpetrator pulled with one hand, causing the bike to tip to one side while the rear wheel remained in contact with the ground, a common indicator when the victim did not dismount voluntarily. Henderson further simulated the pickup's approach by testing different parking angles, parallel, angled, and nose-in. Results showed that in all three models, only a 25-degree angled parking position toward the curb allowed the perpetrator to open the passenger door and reach Caroline fastest without rear traffic obstructing the view. This matched the 1998 description. The Fort Worth girl stated the perpetrator opened the passenger door, not the driver's, to pull the victim into the vehicle. A highly repetitive behavioral detail in offenders who specialize in the grab-and-go method. From the reconstruction data, Henderson also identified another critical element: the pickup's position had to be exactly in the stretch of road, with no stores or homes opening directly onto the street between 4:40–4:50 p.m. As most bicycle shops, laundromats, and grocery stores along Jefferson were busy at that hour. The digitized 1958 map showed only one, approximately 140-foot segment, virtually free of businesses, a brick wall stretch from a small warehouse area demolished in the 1970s. This was precisely where the bicycle was found. Finally, Henderson cross-referenced the full reconstruction data with the 1958 suspect vehicle list and found that the simulated rear door tape structure perfectly matched the pickup photographed by Fort Worth PD in 1998. The rote simulation and ambush point confirmation indicated Caroline's abduction was very likely premeditated, prepared, and carried out by a perpetrator familiar with the terrain, using a mobile vehicle. All simulations converged on one consistent conclusion: the 1958 bicycle recovery location was the single optimal ambush point along Caroline's entire route, and the dark green pickup was capable of accessing the scene in the exact modeled manner that only one suspect from the old files matched. Right after, the 1958 crime scene simulation matched almost perfectly with the approach capabilities of the dark green pickup. Investigator Maria Henderson immediately shifted focus to reanalyzing all evidence from two key time periods: evidence collected at the Jefferson Belvidere scene in 1958, and evidence recovered with the skeletal remains at Cedar Hill in 1974. This was the first time in the case's history that both evidence sets were examined side by side under the same modern 1999 technological standards. All old evidence storage bags, originally wax-sealed and cloth-wrapped, were opened in a controlled pressure analysis room to prevent contamination. The fabric fragments found near the bicycle in 1958, including a gray-blue fiber segment, a small soiled cloth piece, and several unidentified tiny fibers, were placed under a scanning electron microscope to examine microfiber structure. Images at 10,000x magnification showed the gray-blue fiber had a cotton polyester blend structure typical of old-style truck interiors, specifically the Chevrolet pickup cab liner material common in early 1950s models. This caught Henderson's attention because Whitman's vehicle, a 1950 Chevrolet 3100, used exactly this material in its bed construction. All data was recorded and compared against General Motors' archived manufacturer documents, confirming the same material, color and weave method, indicating a very high likelihood that the fiber recovered from the 1958 scene came from the bed of an old 3100 model. Next, Henderson turned to the 1974 Cedar Hill evidence, soil particles adhering to bones, faded fabric scraps, and unidentified dust grains. In 1974, soil analysis was limited to basic composition classification, but in 1999, the lab used infrared spectroscopy and X-ray diffraction to measure mineral grain structure, adhered chemicals, and industrial contaminants in the samples. FTIR analysis of dust adhering to fabric found with the remains detected characteristic signatures of industrial mechanics chalk, a metal grinding powder used in motor and shaft manufacturing shops in the 1950s. Henderson requested deeper Raman spectroscopy for particle group identification, revealing zinc oxide mixed with silicon carbide, a blend specific to grinding compounds used at tractor and farm equipment repair shops in the Oak Cliff area from 1955-1960. When compared against Texas industrial databases, only 2 facilities produced or used this exact compound in Dallas at the time: Oak Cliff Tractor and Engine Works, and a smaller shop in Garland. Whitman's residence and employment records showed that in 1957-1958, he worked part-time at precisely Oak Cliff Tractor and Engine Works, with Caroline's disappearance falling squarely within that period. Henderson immediately ordered collection of residual chalk samples from the old shop walls for direct comparison. Under infrared spectroscopy, the old Oak Cliff shop chalk matched perfectly with the chalk found on Caroline's decayed clothing, including the zinc oxide to silicon carbide ratio and the industrial oil used as a binder during grinding that year. This match was nearly impossible to occur by chance, as this grinding compound appeared only in those 2 Dallas area shops in 1958 and virtually disappeared from the market after 1962 due to production standard changes. This meant Caroline's body had come into direct or indirect contact with an environment containing this highly specific industrial chalk to which Whitman had access. While Henderson continued reviewing soil adhering to the bones, she discovered a 2-layer sediment structure around the tibia, a red clay typical of the Cedar Hill woods, and a fine sandy loam mixed with industrial gravel residue, gravel found only at the rear lot of the Oak Cliff shop where Whitman had worked. This further reinforced forensic conclusion, Part 11, that the body had been buried elsewhere before being moved to Cedar Hill. Thus, the second soil layer inadvertently became the perpetrator's unwanted signature. Finally, Henderson requested analysis of a tiny metal rust flake embedded in the 1958 recovered fiber. Results identified it as carbon steel rust with traces of heavy machine oil, the type commonly used in mechanical shops, especially during tractor transmission disassembly. The oil sample matched the inventory records from Oak Cliff shop during Whitman's employment period. When combining all results, the Chevrolet 3100 interior fiber, industrial chalk from Whitman's workplace, dual-source soil matching the burial transfer route, and characteristic machine oil from the 1958 mechanical shop, Henderson concluded there was a clear material link connecting the body, the 1958 scene, the 1974 scene, and Whitman's work environment. For the first time in the case's history, the physical evidence was no longer vague or merely circumstantial. The link between Whitman and Caroline's remains was no longer based on behavior or circumstance alone, but on specific unique material traces that could not be explained by coincidence. Thanks to 1999 technology, the case had entered an entirely new phase, with the evidence analysis producing a direct physical chain linking Earl Whitman's work environment, the 1958 Jefferson Boulevard scene, and the 1974 Cedar Hill burial site. Investigator Maria Henderson proceeded to the next step, obtaining a search warrant for Whitman's residence under special cold case procedures for living suspects. Based on the forensic report, crime scene simulation, and material matches in Part 15, the Dallas County judge signed the warrant in early June 1999. A joint team from Dallas PD and Texas Rangers carried out the search. Whitman's home in the Waco suburbs, where he had moved in the mid-1980s, was secured early in the morning to avoid alerting neighbors. Whitman was required to leave the house and remain outside in the yard while the team began room-by-room examination by section. The ground floor showed nothing unusual, just simple furnishings of an elderly man living alone. However, Henderson paid special attention to the rear shed, which Whitman kept locked with an old padlock. After forcible entry under court order, the team discovered a wooden box about 60 centimeters long on a high shelf, wrapped in 2 layers of oilcloth to prevent moisture. The box exterior had no markings, but inside were items inconsistent with a single elderly man's lifestyle: a pair of faded pink child's wool socks, a cotton hair tie, an old silver ribbon fragment, a small empty picture frame, and a round-headed wooden doll of the type sold in the late 1950s. All items were sealed and immediately transferred for verification. Henderson and the analysis team noted that everything belonged to items children typically carried or used in the 1950-1960 period. Some were decayed but retained enough structure for comparison with 1958 evidence. Beneath the wooden box, at the bottom of the shelf, was a 1957 Dallas County map, yellowed and heavily creased with torn edges. When unfolded, the team found multiple locations marked in red pencil: one at Jefferson Boulevard, exactly where Caroline's bicycle was found, one at the edge of Oak Cliff, near the former tractor lot vacant area, and a large circled area at Cedar Hill, matching almost precisely the 1974 body discovery site. The Cedar Hill circle was double-traced, noticeably darker than the others, suggesting Whitman had revisited the site or considered it especially significant. Beside the map, a bundle of old newspapers wrapped in wax paper was also found. When opened, they were Dallas Morning News pages from August and September 1958, with all articles related to Caroline Brooks' disappearance clipped into neat squares. One page had a blue ink underline on the description: "Police found Caroline's bicycle on Jefferson Boulevard before she went missing." This showed Whitman not only followed the case at the time, but deliberately preserved information, classic behavior of abductors or perpetrators who keep trophy items to relive the crime. In an older metal cabinet drawer, the team found a small tin box containing gray-blue fabric scraps with fiber structure very similar to the sample recovered near the bicycle in 1958. Whitman's retention of material matching the 1950 Chevrolet 3100 interior raised the possibility he had intentionally preserved a portion of the vehicle's interior used in the crime. The evidence seized from Whitman's home, especially the wooden box of children's items, the Cedar Hill marked map, and the 1958 missing person news clippings, far exceeded incidental possession or harmless collecting. When strung together with physical data, behavioral patterns, and geographic connections, it all became powerful corroborating evidence of Whitman's decades-long obsession with the Caroline case. Investigator Henderson immediately declared, in an internal memo, that there was sufficient basis to elevate Whitman from person of interest to official prime suspect, level 1, allowing deeper investigative measures. For the first time since 1958, Dallas authorities had a legally supported level of suspicion to treat Whitman as the central suspect rather than just one name on a list. After more than 4 decades, the case had reached the point of direct confrontation. After seizing key evidence from Whitman's home, including the Cedar Hill marked map, the wooden box of children's items, and news clippings related to Caroline Brooks, investigator Maria Henderson requested in-depth interrogation to assess psychological responses, check for statement inconsistencies, and seek inadvertently revealing details. Since Whitman was over 60 and had never been questioned as an official prime suspect, the strategy involved multiple sessions, each focused on a distinct topic to prevent rehearsed answers. The first session centered on his 1958 schedule. Whitman claimed he didn't remember clearly, repeatedly stating he worked at a movie theater at the time, but when investigators matched this against original 1958 timesheets, the periods he claimed to be working coincided with days he was actually absent. When asked why records showed an unreported absence on the exact day Caroline disappeared, Whitman evaded, saying back then people kept sloppy records. The second session focused on his dark green pickup. Whitman admitted owning a 1950 Chevrolet 3100, but insisted he sold it in 1960. When asked about repairing the rear window with tape, Whitman appeared surprised and asked, "Who told you that?" Even though this detail had never been publicly disclosed in any news from 1958 to 1999. This was the first anomaly. Henderson privately noted Whitman's reaction showed extreme wariness, not like an innocent person, but like someone testing how much the investigators knew. The third session shifted to the 1957 map found in his home. Whitman initially denied owning it, but when shown photos from the search warrant, he switched to claiming it's an old map I picked up, despite the precise circled locations tied to the case. More strikingly, when Henderson asked why the map had a pencil mark at Cedar Hill, Whitman replied, "That's a hard-to-reach forest. No one would find anything there unless they knew the way." This was an unusual statement, as in 1958 Cedar Hill was not a focal area, and the 1974 body site details had never been publicly released. The fourth session was the most critical, confronting Whitman's statements with forensic traces. Investigators asked why he had old Chevrolet 3100 interior fabric matching the 1958 scene sample among his possessions. Whitman said, "That's leftover stuff I kept from fixing the truck." When Henderson asked where the truck was repaired, Whitman answered, "At the tractor shop on the edge of Oak Cliff." This detail strongly caught Henderson's attention, as Oak Cliff Tractor and Engine Works was exactly where the industrial chalk matching the victim's 1974 clothing had originated, a detail police had never made public. The interrogation team recorded this as the second time Whitman referenced case-specific operational knowledge he could not have known without connection to the remains. The fifth session focused on behavioral reconstruction. Henderson asked, in 1958, "Why did you take off work exactly on August 14th? Whitman said, "I went to fix the truck." When asked where the truck broke down, Whitman replied, "Right along Jefferson, near that brick wall." This was precisely the location where Caroline's bicycle was found, information kept in investigative files, but never appearing in press or public summaries. This answer was considered decisive, as Whitman could not have known the bicycle discovery spot without direct involvement in Caroline's disappearance. At the end of the session, when Henderson tested an open-ended probe, "Did you ever drive into Cedar Hill in 1958? Whitman hesitated for several seconds before saying, "Don't remember, but maybe." An innocent person would say no, someone involved, but fearing self-incrimination would hedge exactly what Whitman did. From the sixth session onward, the team focused on exploiting internal inconsistencies. On one hand, Whitman claimed he rarely drove into Oak Cliff, yet he also said he fixed the truck on the edge of Oak Cliff and passed Jefferson the day it broke down. Inconsistencies were flagged, cross-referenced, and included in reports. Henderson used a 1958 timeline chart and forced Whitman to account for each time slot. At the 4:40 p.m. window, when Caroline passed Jefferson, Whitman could provide no alibi. He only said, "I might have been driving around." When asked where, he replied, "Somewhere near the church area." This inadvertently matched the victim's disappearance time and location perfectly. The climax of the entire process occurred in the seventh session, when Whitman, in a momentary slip, said, "I didn't leave anything there," when asked about the 1958 evidence. The word "there" was immediately noted by the team, because the suspect had just implicitly admitted being at the 1958 scene, despite previously denying it vehemently. This was the pivotal detail. With contradictory statements, unexpected references to Cedar Hill and Jefferson Bliv D, and knowledge of never-publicized information, investigator Henderson established probable cause, strong legal grounds, to seek an arrest warrant for Whitman's direct involvement in the abduction and murder of Caroline Brooks. After more than 4 decades, the case finally reached a legal breaking point. The trial of Earl Whitman at the end of 1999 took place in a Dallas County courtroom, where the prosecutor presented to the jury a chain of evidence spanning 41 years, a structure pieced together from layers of forgotten facts, seemingly meaningless physical items, and small inconsistencies in the defendant's statements. The prosecution began by reconstructing the timeline of Caroline Brooks' disappearance on the afternoon of August 14, 1958. The girl left Cliff Temple Baptist Church at 4:35 p.m., traveled along Jefferson Boulevard, and vanished sometime between 4:40 and 4:50 p.m. Caroline's bicycle was found in a very specific location, a recessed spot on the roadside that was used as a temporary parking area for delivery trucks, a position later proven through 3D modeling to be the single optimal ambush point for a grab-and-go abduction. The prosecution then presented crime scene #1 with evidence reanalyzed using 1999 technology. Fibers from the interior of an old Chevrolet 3100 pickup truck, a piece of rusted metal mixed with heavy machine oil, and traces of foreign soil not native to Jefferson Boulevard. All were projected enlarged before the jury using SEM images, revealing microscopic structural details undetectable by 1958 techniques. From there, the prosecution linked the 1958 crime scene to 1974 forensic data, the year Caroline's skeletal remains were discovered in Cedar Hill. The forensic expert explained that soil analysis on the bones showed two distinct sources: red clay from Cedar Hill and sandy soil mixed with industrial gravel residue, characteristic of the fringe area of Oak Cliff, where the Oak Cliff Tractor and Engine Works shop was located. This was the shop where Whitman had worked precisely during the period Caroline disappeared. The prosecution emphasized that the metal grinding dust containing zinc oxide and silicon carbide found on the victim's clothing was not widely available in 1958 and existed in only 2 industrial shops in Dallas, one of which was Whitman's part-time workplace. When presented in court, the infrared spectroscopy expert showed near-perfect matching between the industrial dust sample recovered from Caroline's remains and residue still present on the walls of the Oak Cliff shop after 4 decades. This was the critical link establishing the body's presence in an area Whitman had access to. Next, the prosecution introduced the chain of trophy items seized from Whitman's home during the search warrant. They displayed in court a wooden box containing children's socks, hair ties, a piece of silver ribbon, and a wooden doll, items that belonged to no one living in the household. A 1957 Dallas County map found with circled locations of the Jefferson scene, the Oak Cliff fringe, and Cedar Hill was projected on screen, making it clear to the jury that Whitman had not only followed the case, but possessed detailed knowledge of key points never publicly disclosed. The prosecution continued with evidence of repeated behavior in 1998, the Fort Worth case of a girl who escaped. The victim herself, now 12 years old, testified in court that the perpetrator's pickup had tape covering the rear window, exactly matching the description of Whitman's vehicle in 1958. Behavioral experts from the Texas Rangers confirmed that the 2 incidents, 1958 and 1998, shared the same crime pattern: rapid approach, pulling the victim into the passenger seat, choosing a blind spot location, using a long bed pickup as the abduction vehicle. This demonstrated behavioral consistency in the offender, a factor cited from federal criminal behavioral analysis literature. After presenting the full forensic chain, the prosecution moved to the crucial part: Whitman's self-contradictory statements during interrogations. They played audio excerpts in which Whitman referred to Cedar Hill as a place nobody would find anything unless they knew the way, even though police had never publicly released information about the body's discovery location. Other segments showed Whitman mentioning repairing a vehicle right there on Jefferson, near the brick wall, precisely the spot where Caroline's bicycle was found. A particularly damning moment came when asked about evidence at the scene. Whitman said, "I didn't leave anything there," inadvertently admitting presence at the 1958 abduction site. The prosecution built the evidence chain as an overall structure, stressing that the case rested on a tightly interconnected set of crime scene forensic evidence, behavioral pattern, employment history, seized items from the home, contradictory statements, and crime repetition after 40 years. This chain, the prosecution argued, could not coincidentally occur with any innocent person within a 100-mile radius. The defense attempted to counter by emphasizing no direct DNA and no eyewitness seeing Whitman pull Caroline into the vehicle. They argued the entire case rested on circumstantial association and geographic coincidence. However, the prosecution countered with forensic statistics, the random probability of the characteristic grinding dust, truck interior fibers, dual-source soil, travel timing, and behavioral indicators, all converging on the same suspect, was less than 1 in 10 million. The forensic expert stood before the jury and explained, "No DNA does not mean no evidence. In cases predating modern DNA, we rely on the unique convergence of factors. Here, those factors cannot separate Whitman from the scene, the body, and the evidence." The prosecution also stressed that the details Whitman inadvertently revealed during interrogation, especially the bicycle location and the Jefferson approach, appeared in no public document whatsoever, proving he could only have known them by being present that day. After closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate with the entire case structure presented both chronologically and forensically. At the end of the second day of deliberation, the jury requested to re-examine the 1957 map and the industrial dust samples. They also asked to rehear the 4th and 7th interrogation tapes of Whitman. All of this showed their focus was not on any single piece of evidence, but on the degree of match across the entire chain the prosecution had constructed. As deliberations stretched into the third day, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew so tense it was almost palpable. Each juror was required to consider not only was Whitman there the day Caroline disappeared, but the larger question, is there any other reasonable explanation for this entire 41-year chain of evidence? They worked in silence, taking notes, comparing, cross-referencing, and preparing to reach a final verdict. When the jury returned to the courtroom on the afternoon of the third day, the entire gallery fell completely silent. The judge asked the jury foreperson to stand, and in one brief but weighty statement, the foreperson announced they had reached a unanimous verdict. Earl Whitman was guilty of the kidnapping and murder of Caroline Brooks in 1958, based on the overall chain of evidence presented by the prosecution. No juror dissented. After reading the formal verdict, the judge pronounced sentence, life imprisonment without parole, taking into account the prolonged calculated nature of the crime and the extreme severity of concealing the body for over 4 decades. The court concluded that Whitman continued to pose a danger to the community by reenacting abduction behavior in 1998, demonstrating a pattern of repeat offending and complete lack of remorse. Immediately after sentencing, bailiffs handcuffed and escorted Whitman out of the courtroom to the prisoner transport van bound for Huntsville Unit, Texas's oldest maximum security prison. This is where the state's most dangerous inmates are housed, and where Whitman would spend the remainder of his life. As the van door closed, several people outside the courthouse reported hearing his faint protesting cries, but that anger was drowned out by the cheers of dozens of Oak Cliff residents who had followed the case for decades. In an internal report, Dallas PD officially closed the Caroline Brooks file after 41 years. The department's press release stated, "The case was resolved through the combination of modern forensic techniques, the persistence of cold case investigators, and interagency cooperation between Dallas PD, Fort Worth PD, and Texas Rangers." This was the first time in department history that a missing persons case from the 1950s was fully solved using a multi-layered analysis model, vintage forensics, modern forensics, behavioral analysis, and spatial reconstruction. For the Oak Cliff community, the Whitman verdict had an impact far beyond a typical criminal case. Residents along Jefferson Boulevard, many now elderly, recalled how the Caroline case had left the entire neighborhood living in fear for years. In interviews, Many said this case stole the innocence of an entire generation. When the verdict was announced, alongside relief came reflection on the shortcomings of child protection mechanisms in the 1950s, lack of warnings, lack of response protocols, lack of systems to identify repeat risk patterns. After the trial, Dallas, Fort Worth media outlets published articles on lessons learned, stressing the importance of long-term evidence preservation, improved record storage procedures, and the role of technology in solving cold cases. Child safety experts in Texas noted that the Caroline Brooks case helped shape new street safety standards in the following decade, including student monitoring programs, marking high-risk traffic points, and creating safe routes around churches and schools. In Oak Cliff, the community held a small ceremony to place a memorial marker for Caroline near the spot where her bicycle was found in 1958. The marker reads, "So that no child ever disappears without being found again." Schools in Dallas County began using the case as an annual case study in safety education programs. Professionally, it became a classic example taught at police academies nationwide in cold case investigation training. Training materials call it the Caroline Brooks model. Integration of cross-generational forensics, spatial simulation, repeat offender behavioral analysis, and exploitation of statement inconsistencies. Federal agencies, including the FBI, recognized the case as the clearest demonstration of the value of preserving evidence, even when contemporary technology could not fully exploit it. In the years following the verdict, many families with long-missing children in Texas contacted Dallas PD to learn about long-dormant investigation recovery procedures, creating a new wave of statewide cold case processing. For Caroline's family, the verdict could not erase the pain but provided the closure they had waited more than half a lifetime for. They were finally able to bring their daughter's remains home for a proper burial, attended by the investigators who had pursued the case to its end. In a final statement at the burial ceremony, Caroline's mother said, "Justice came late, but justice came." For the Oak Cliff community, the Caroline Brooks case transformed from a 4-decade haunting into a powerful reminder of society's shared responsibility to protect children and never let any disappearance be forgotten. For law enforcement, it became a symbol of the ability to solve cases no matter how much time has passed, as long as the traces are not abandoned. The case closed, but its aftershocks continued to shape how Texas handles long-term missing persons cases for years afterward. The story of Caroline Brooks, a disappearance in Dallas in 1958 that was only solved in 1999, shows us a truth that never grows old in American society. Community safety depends not only on technology or law enforcement, but also on vigilance, information preservation, and the relentless pursuit of justice across generations. What happened to Caroline began with what seemed like a harmless detail: a little girl riding her bike home from Cliff Temple Baptist Church along the familiar Jefferson-Blevedy route. That very familiarity led the family to believe nothing could go wrong, a mindset many American families still fall into today when underestimating risks in their own neighborhoods. The case also highlights the importance of reporting to police immediately upon noticing anything unusual. Caroline's family called at 6:05 p.m., an action that established a clear timeline for the investigation. In a modern context, this equates to today's parents proactively using phones, location sharing, home door cameras, or personal safety apps, tools the Brooks family did not have back then. Another key lesson comes from Dallas PD's decision to retain all evidence even though 1958 technology could not deeply analyze it. By preserving fibers, adhered soil, and tiny metal fragments, 1999 forensics was able to link Whitman to the remains. This reminds us that in modern life, storing data, photos, camera footage, and reports serves not only the present, but can become crucial evidence in the future. Finally, the 1998 Fort Worth escape case proves that criminal behavior tends to repeat, and community members proactively reporting, even when it's just a suspicion, can be the factor that reopens a seemingly forgotten cold case. In today's American society, with car travel, open spaces, and high personal freedom, vigilance, community spirit, and support for the justice system remain the foundation for protecting children and ensuring no disappearance falls into silence. Thank you for following this entire 41-year journey to justice. Your support helps stories like this continue to be told. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to join us for the next cases, where the truth is always waiting to be uncovered.